The Lando Calrissian books have something of a reputation for being bonkers and overall not very good. But I enjoyed the Han Solo books well enough, mostly, so I figured I'd give him a shot. Lando has the potential to be a really good character that can certainly drive his own adventures, and while I still believe that's true, this is not it. Part of the problem might be my own baggage. I was hoping for a different kind of story. But let's get into it. So my problem started from the prologue of this book, Lando Calrissian and the Mind Harp of Sharu, where Lando sits in on a pretty low-rent card game and wins a droid he doesn't really want from an anthropologist, the Odefa Osuno Wet is his name. I was kind of hoping Lando was going to be at some high-end place, taking on high-stakes odds, but I guess it's character development that he's down on his luck to start. Okay. I guess it's consistent with his character. In Legends canon, at least, every time we catch up with him, he's working on an unexpected angle, whether it's the Tabana gas mine on Cloud City or the mining operation on Niklon. He's always doing something. He's always got an angle. Anyway, he goes to the nearby Rafa system to claim the droid, but is then picked up by the local governor, Dudazamir, who wants Lando to do a job for him. Also on hand to convince Lando is Roker Gepta, a sorcerer of Tund. They want Lando to find an item known as the Mind Harp of Sharu for them. Why Lando? That's a great question. The actual answer would be both spoilery and too convoluted, so let's just go with because the story needs it to happen. Lando takes the job because they're going to give him a Millennium Falcon's hold full of life crystals in payment. The planet has these orchards filled with trees that grow life crystals, which, when worn on the person, grant longer life and intelligence and things like that. It's very strange. These crystals are harvested by prisoners, as well as this race of very old, very dumb natives. Governor Merrick gives Lando an artifact called the Key, which will help him in his quest. So Lando and his new droid start visiting local bars to get some information. The droid's name is Vufi Ra. He is very old and doesn't even remember where he came from, and is of a different design than your typical droids. Though the cover artists seem not to get the likeness down correctly, which is kind of a theme with these books. Actually, I'm not entirely sure what the cover is depicting. Maybe it's like the cover of an Atari game, promising a general feel of an experience. The book kind of is the narrative equivalent of 4-bit graphics, actually. Anyway, at one of the bars, they meet a local native named Mose, who is sweeping up. He recognizes the key, tries to take it from Lando in an exciting fistfight battle, but eventually agrees to help Lando and Vufi Ra find the Mind Harp because, as he says, they have been prophesied to be the ones to recover it. I don't know why they got into a fistfight over it first, though. If they're the prophesied people, whatever. They head to another planet in the Rafa system to find the Mind Harp, but what they find may be more than they bargained for. This isn't what I would have wanted from an adventure based around Lando. What do we know about Lando?
Card player, gambler, scoundrel. You'd like him.
Nice. The mining colony?
Yeah, Tabana gas mine. Lando conned somebody out of it. We go back a long way, Lando and me.
Can you trust him?
No. He's got no love for the Empire, I can tell you that.
He's a gambler, he's a ladies' man, he exists on the edges of civilized culture. The book acknowledges all these aspects of his character, but puts him in a scenario where his core skills barely factor into the story. This could have been a Han Solo book with only minor changes, or really any generic pulpy sci-fi protagonist. I know the author, L. Neil Smith, only had like 9 weeks to crank out 3 books in the series, but maybe it would have been easier and better for the character if he had just ripped off the basic plot from an episode of the old TV show Maverick and retrofitted it into the Star Wars setting. I've seen elements of the story described as psychedelic, and I'd also maybe add a dash of Lovecraftian. as the Shrew have left behind massive ruins beyond human scale and dimensional comprehension, and much of their motives are inscrutable. One thing I did like, and don't often see elsewhere in Star Wars, is using the definite article when referring to star systems. For instance, Lando doesn't say he's in the Rafa system, he says that he's in the Rafa. Kind of like that. I feel like Lando Calrissian's characterization here is not fantastic. A lot of his dialogue would sound unnatural coming out of the mouth of Billy D. Williams, and the running gag where he keeps telling Vieux-Furah not to call him master is way less funny than the book seems to think it is, even though, spoilers, it runs through all 3 books. Also, if I were an editor for this book, I would have taken another pass at it to replace more Earth terms with Star Wars terms. Lando's clothing materials are sometimes described as velvoid, and he drinks caffeine, but he also occasionally smokes cigarettes and cigars, and some items are made of plastic. While it's true that terms for these probably weren't invented yet, it's a good time to just make up some stuff. I've never seen velvoid before or since. I'd never read this book, but it definitely was giving me summer vacation reading vibes from when I was a kid and would take out pulpy paperbacks from the library. Let's just hope the next book, Lando Calrissian and the Flame Wind of Ocean, is better. Lando Calrissian and the Flame Wind of Ocean. It's a minor improvement from the previous book, in that I got my wish that Lando's next adventure be set in an upscale location with large quantities of money being thrown around. And there are plenty of double crosses in this story, including a series of climactic reversals. But ultimately, Lando still isn't doing a ton of Lando things, and his droid Vieux-Furah is still bailing him out of most situations. But I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. So Lando's been invited to the Ocean system, a system whose planets were long ago pulverized into thousands of asteroids. These asteroids are now home to many of the galaxy's rich and elite. There's an annual solar flare called the Flame Wind that causes a rainbow aurora to make its way through the system. And it draws a lot of tourists for the views, but it's also dangerous to fly through due to the radiation. He's invited to the Ocean by Administrator Lob Dolof to play some high-stakes games of sabacc. It's pretty obvious from the start that this is going to be a setup of some kind, and it is. He quickly runs afoul of the law because he kills a guy who came at him with a lead pipe, and also because he has a small blaster on him, and carrying any kind of weapon like that in the Ocean is basically a death penalty. So the administrator gives him a job to work off the crimes. He has to transport a lady cop who assists the administrator, and also Big Bird from Sesame Street, who is a narcotics officer, to the asteroid of the maybe richest guy in the galaxy, and bust him for snorting fungus off the backs of lizards. What could possibly go wrong? Lando and Vieux-Furah are being pursued by 2 antagonists in this book. We vaguely remember Roker Gepta, Sorcerer of Tund, from the previous book. He's back and sworn revenge on Lando for his plot in the last book going sideways, even though it wasn't Lando's fault. I got the impression from the first book that the Sorcerers of Tund, or at least the type of sorcerer Gepta was attempting to portray, was like some kind of inept version of the Techno-Mages from Babylon 5, I guess. Gepta's kind of the worst. He's backed by the Centrality, a weird quasi-territory within Imperial space, I guess. I guess they couldn't use the Empire for the books, so they had to create like a little insulated mini-government for antagonist purposes. He has a decommissioned Imperial cruiser called the Wenus, which I kept reading as Weenus. He reads like a Scooby-Doo villain, mustache-twirling kind of guy. And is obsessed with Lando only because the plot requires it, really. Concocts an overly complex scheme just to get revenge, which Lando just kind of gets out of with help from Vieux-Furah and no significant problems. If you're enjoying this video, why not buy my book? Flight of the Pangolin is the story of an intrepid group of heroes who decide to exit the solar system over the objections of an isolationist faction. There's actually a lot more going on than that. There's space pirates, a giant spider for no reason, all kinds of other things. Buy it now online wherever you buy books or at our website, www.thepangolinrepublic.com. You can also get fun t-shirts and random other stuff if you want. There's also this fleet of old rickety starfighters lassoed to the engine of an old dreadnought, and they're chasing Lando around throughout the book, and they attack at the worst possible moments. Apparently they're after Vufi Ra for destroying their entire civilization, which seems insane, but here we are. Vufi and his previous owner, if you'll remember, the anthropologist that Lando won the droid from, the Defa Otsuno Wet, got assigned by their government to do a first contact mission. But it was less Star Trek and more to serve man.
It's a cookbook!
They unified the local government, streamlined the local military, then the centrality swooped in and strip-mined the place, literally and figuratively. The reason why these guys are chasing Vufi Ra specifically, and don't ask me how they're even finding him, is because the Odefa Osuno Wet had posed as Vufi's assistant, and the droid was set up as the alien dignitary in charge. So they blame Vufi Ra for everything that happened to their world. The subplot is, I don't know, it's kind of dumb. The entire book is pretty dumb, actually. The plot works out to be a bad parody of like a Coen Brothers film mixed with an old Flash Gordon serial or something, which is an odd pairing, to be sure. And maybe could be done well, but here it doesn't really pan out too great. I can't say I enjoyed this book a lot, but I was very curious throughout to see where it was going. It turns out it was going to a resolution with a series of double crosses culminating in the Big Bird narcotics officer shooting the lady cop's head off. Yes, I spoiled the most interesting thing that happens in this book. You're welcome. There's also a Trick cereal reference for no good reason, and Lando smokes too many cigarettes and cigars. Can I make it through one more of these? I'm going to try. No! So how do you close out this fairly underwhelming book series? Underwhelmingly. Lando Calrissian and the Star Cave of Thonbaka. What a title, huh? All these titles are pretty good, kind of pulpy, right? It only has that title because they needed to be consistent, though. A more accurate title would be the Star Cave called Thonbaka. The Star Cave is a nebula in which live a race of many kilometer-long, transparent, manta ray jellyfish-looking things called Oswaft. They are highly intelligent, they breathe vacuum, and are capable of traveling in hyperspace in short hops. Yeah. The book follows Lehisu, an Oswaft who travels outside the Star Cave. He's the first of his kind to even consider leaving the nebula, and while he's out exploring, he makes contact with Lando and Vufi Ra and the Millennium Falcon, which he at first mistakes to be a life form itself. Roker Gepta, Sorcerer of Tund, has once again teamed up with the fighter squadron led by Klin Shanga to find the Falcon. Gepta's flagship, the Wennis, has been upgraded with some deadly new weaponry, and the book gives us a deeper dive into the goings-on of the respective factions. We learn a bunch more about the centrality, which was glossed over in the other books to the point where I thought it didn't really matter, but turns out it very much does. The anthropologist, the Odetfa Osuno Wet, reappears here, working for and spying on Gepta in equal measure, which he has apparently been doing this whole time. All the subplots of the previous books come together in a way that should be impressive, but none of the characters except Lando and Vufi Ra are compelling enough for us to care, and Lando mostly because we know him from the movies. Anyway, because all of this has to come together somehow, Gepta decides to destroy the Star Cave to steal the valuable resources inside, as well as upset Lando, setting the stage for a grand space battle between capital ships and transparent space manta rays that is not nearly as thrilling as it should be, and a climactic showdown between Lando and Vufi Ra and the Sorcerer of Tund that is about as nonsensical and anticlimactic as you might expect from anything involving the character of Roker Gepta. We do finally learn the origins of Vufi Ra, though, which is also somewhat underwhelming. This is book 3 for many of these characters, and while the characterization's never been consistent throughout the series, Lando never sounds remotely like he does in the movies. However, this book does have a sequence where we finally see Lando doing Lando things. So in an effort to get as close as he can to the Star Cave to help the Oswaft, he approaches the blockade of centrality ships and goes aboard them one by one, selling stuff to the crews and playing sabacc with them, getting closer and closer to the Star Cave until he makes a break for it. He launches a kind of countermeasure to make them think that the Falcon was destroyed when the ships inevitably fire on him, when in reality it made a hyperspace hop over to the Star Cave. This combination of con artistry, gambling, hustling, and quick thinking is the kind of thing we should have gotten in these books all along. The Oswaft are interesting characters, probably deserve to be more than a footnote in a lackluster Lando Calrissian book. Maybe in a book that's a bit less pulpy and more philosophical. They do remind me of the Purgils from Star Wars Rebels and Ahsoka and everything. I guess they add some dimension to Lando, where he's willing to fight for these beings who are quick studies, but only now just finding out about civilization outside the Star Cave, and how many guns those civilizations have. Lando, of course, uses Sabak to teach them these concepts of civilization. Let's talk about Roker Gepta for a minute, because this guy... The more we learn about Roker Gepta, the less interesting he is. He barely registered in the first book. He was foiled pretty easily in the second book. Here we see him interacting with his ship crews, who are all very afraid of him since he seems to kill them all the time. But Clint Shanga and his men have a low opinion of him, and he doesn't seem to keep Lando up at night. He's just a really ill-considered, poorly conceived villain overall. I guess the idea was to undercut his presence when introducing him by having Lando believe him to be some kind of charlatan of no consequence, when actually the twist is he's basically an incredibly powerful Sith Lord with the serial numbers filed off. Supposedly, this guy learned everything he could from the Sorcerers of Tund, which, according to Wikipedia, they've massaged them into canon somewhere near the Night Sisters of Dathomir in the Sith-adjacent spectrum. Then he killed all the Sorcerers of Tund so he could be the only Sorcerer of Tund. He can change his appearance, which comes up like twice throughout the series. He kills his underlings constantly, undermining their ability to work. But there's no good reason why this guy should be hung up on Lando. And ultimately, that's the problem with him. It would be like Darth Vader being obsessed with Han Solo. It takes him like 10 minutes to find that guy, and he takes care of him real quick because he has more important things to do. If Donald Glover ends up doing his Lando series or movie or whatever it's going to be, and I very much think he should, I think they could adapt Flame Wind of Ocean into something interesting if they rework it quite a bit. Mineharp of Shrew is a bit too trippy, though I guess it is canon.
The Calrissian Chronicles, Chapter 5, continued. Personally, I wasn't all that impressed with the Shrew. No sense of humor or style. Nonetheless, their L3 and I were deep in their sacred temple, and that's when we saw it.
And Star Cave of Thonbaka is maybe too Star Trek with the Oswaft subplot, but I'd really love to see more Lando stories. He's a great character with a lot of potential. It's just mostly unrealized with these books. I don't like to do negative book reports, but I would say that this series is only worth your time as a curiosity. It doesn't do much to fill Lando's backstory or give us insights into his character. Most of the other characters are just okay, except for Roker Gepta, who's terrible. The plots are a mixed bag. There's not a lot to recommend here, unfortunately. So, unless you're on a mission to complete every book in Legends canon, or your curiosity is getting the best of you, I'd say these are skippable. So tune in next time for another episode of Mike's Book Report, where I talk about a book that you haven't thought about since 1983.